Good morning. And for any of you guys who watched my previous video and are worried that I might break into song in this one, you're in luck. I'm not going to sing, so you can remove the earplugs now. What I want to talk about this morning is, well, kind of allied to the issue of loot boxes and what we saw with Battlefront 2 and their backing off and what's going on. And when I woke up this morning, I saw a video from Sid Alpha. And if you haven't checked out his channel, go and do so. I'll put a link in below. He doesn't need my help. He's big enough already. But he is worth watching. He's a bit of a consumer advocate. And I think his videos are almost universally very good. But once you've checked out his channel, come back here and listen to this. What I saw in the video he put up, I think last night, was a report that came out, and it's been reported by CNBC News, in which an analyst says that gamers should pay more. And Sid Alpha goes through this and breaks it down. So I'm not going to go through that now. Go and watch his video about that. But I was thinking about this, and it got me thinking more broadly. And initially I thought it's the same old tired bullshit that we seem to get when anyone complains about the exploitative practices that are currently prevailing in the AAA gaming industry. It's nothing new, is it? It employs the same kind of tactics we've seen from the likes of the smoking industry in the past. You know, you don't need to win the argument, you just need to muddy the waters, confuse people enough that they kind of give up and just think, oh, we've lost. And, you know, it's been heartening that actually with what's happened with EA, they've taken a big hit and it's caused a big stir and it looks like we're moving in the right direction. But as Sid Alpha says, people get fatigue from these things and they stop caring about it, and then things move on, and guess what? We get it all back again. The sad thing is that a lot of people will also buy into this crap that we should be paying more, and it's bullshit. They'll buy into the crap and then they'll go out and buy the game and not take into account the fact that companies like EA, Activision, Ubisoft, all these people are making billions every year. And that's with or without the loot boxes. But anyway, that's kind of an aside. What this got me thinking about more generally was, is this a good thing for the gaming industry? Not just the consumer, but the industry itself. Because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, is it sustainable? Can they keep flogging this to us? Can they keep giving us these loot boxes, these microtransactions, and keep coming up with more and more exploitative ways of, well, getting into our wallets? We've had this recent debacle with Battlefront 2, but it's not the only game to be guilty of engaging in these exploitative practices. EA has other games out this year that continue to push this model. And I'm looking at Need for Speed. And then we've got Activision, who seem to want to reinvent World War II as a themed casino. And while Warner are intent on stripping all artistic integrity from Lord of the Rings with Shadow of War. But if we're going to look at Shadow of War and Lord of the Rings, I'd like to actually talk about that for a minute, because it reminds me of something that went on with Lord of the Rings when the book first came out. And I don't know if any of you guys know the story about what happened with The Lord of the Rings, but it's a very interesting story. And I think it has a bearing on what we're talking about here. Because the publication of the book, well, it's a very interesting case. And it offers an interesting glimpse into why it's important to take risks. Because when assessing The Lord of the Rings in 1952, Rayner Unwin told his father that it was a work of genius that would lose the company £1,000. Now, in 1952, £1,000 was an awful lot more than it is currently. So he was basically saying to his father that they should publish the book anyway and take the hit. And his father said that if it really was a work of genius, it was worth taking the hit. And I'm paraphrasing here. Obviously, they weren't saying take the hit because we're talking 1952. And their parlance was rather different to the way we speak now. But nevertheless, they were saying that it was worth taking the hit in order to publish something that was worthwhile. And what was interesting about that is that, well, we know the history of it. And it kind of ticked over until the 1960s, until the book was picked up, well, kind of by the hippies, and it became a big thing. And I remember when I first heard about The Lord of the Rings, it was already huge by then. And now we've seen films and games and TV stuff and all sorts of stuff. And they keep putting out more stuff every year. And it's become a massive industry. So taking that hit in the short term actually helped to make a lot of people a lot of money. And so it was worth taking the risk. But it was a risk. And when I look at this, I think about the big AAA developers and the publishers. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, well, they make these billions every year. They're actually in a very unique position to take some financial risks. EA have their perennial cash cows like FIFA and Madden. And they could take some of the money they make from those games and they could plough some of that money back into the business. They could even afford to have a couple of studios set aside to work on new projects without the constant need to create something profitable. And I'm not saying here that profit's a bad thing. What I'm saying is being prepared to take some risks could actually reap rewards down the line, both for us, the gamers, and for the companies, because this is where they're going to find their new IPs. And also, if we go back to the book, The Lord of the Rings, if you produce something that is considered highly by your customers, then it gives you cachet. It gives you, well, it builds you up. It makes the company look good. And look, this might seem to go against their business interests, but as I've already kind of alluded to, I don't think it really does. Corporate greed has led us to the situation with Battlefront 2 and, the Lord of the Rings stuff. If we look at Shadow of War, a lot of people are really pissed off about it. And as I say, it's come about as a direct result of corporate greed. And if we look at Battlefront 2, it's now tainting EA and Disney. And it's affecting their reputations in a negative way. And that's probably why Disney has stepped in, because they've got a film coming and they don't want their reputation tainted in this way. Taking a risk with something that might not make as much money in the short term could actually end up paying dividends in the future. Literally paying dividends to the shareholders of the companies. And without taking these risks, they'll never create anything new and certainly nothing bloody worthwhile. Churning out the same tired old shit year after year will eventually lead to diminishing returns because, frankly, even the dullest fanboy will eventually get bored. Eventually. And, even the people who are defending these practices, eventually most of them will get tired of being taken for a ride. I've done this before and I'm going to use it again. I use the analogy of cornflakes. Cornflakes sells. It's something that will keep selling. It will always sell. It's a staple. But even Kellogg's have to come up with new ideas occasionally because people don't just want cornflakes. Sometimes they want something different, something new. And if you keep trying to recreate cornflakes, people will eventually realise that everything tastes exactly the same. Look, of course, EA, Activision, Warner and just about everybody else in the AAA industry are pinning their hopes on loot boxes because of the psychological hooks that get under people's skins and keep them playing, not for fun, but because to a greater or lesser degree they're becoming addicted. And look, you can try and argue otherwise, but the evidence is against you. And if you want to get into that debate with me in the comments, let's do so. But I think this shows a lack of insight by the AAA industry, or, well, maybe both of these, or a disregard for the customer, a complete and total disregard for the customer. And I think we do see in some circumstances, I do think that that's what's going on. But it's not just a disregard for the customer, is it? As I've already mentioned above, there's a complete disregard for the artistic integrity of the industry itself. And I would argue that anybody involved in the industry who doesn't care for the industry should frankly fuck off, because they're not doing it any good in the long term. I don't think this seeming contempt for the customer's healthy. I really don't. And as I've said, I don't think it's sustainable. We've seen time and time again what happens to companies that start to take their customers for granted. The one that sticks in my mind is Gerald Ratner. I think that was back in the 80s. And he described, or maybe the early 90s, he described a decanter set that his jewelry chain was selling as total crap. And that caused, surprisingly, a downward spiral in the company's fortunes. I look at today and I look at some of the stuff coming out of Andrew Wilson's mouth, and it's not that far off. Okay, look, it's couched in different language and he's not as upfront about it as Ratner was. But it amounts to much the same thing, and that is a complete contempt for the customer. It's not difficult to read what Andrew Wilson says and come to the conclusion that he doesn't really give a damn about the customers. And he's not the only one. You listen to stuff that's being said by the people in the industry, and it's quite worrying because it's completely at odds with what we got from Unwin back in the 50s when they were talking about Lord of the Rings. They looked at that product, they looked at that book, and they were like, well, we have to put that out, regardless of how much it costs us, because it's important. It's important to make a work of art available to people. And I think we need a little bit more of that in the gaming industry. And, there are some good guys out there who are engaged in trying to make something good and new and interesting. And, I'm looking at Guerrilla Games with a Horizon Zero Dawn, and the model there I think is fantastic. Whether you like the game or not, I think you've got to look at the model and think, actually, that's a much better way of doing things. And I think Sony should be given some props for giving them the time and the room to develop something, as far as we can tell anyway, that is different and new and interesting. And okay, it's an open world game and it's not really my type of thing normally, but I think they've done very, very well with that game. And Naughty Dog again, and that's under Sony as well. I think Naughty Dog have been given the freedom to produce quality products. And these are cachet products. They make Sony look good. They make Naughty Dog look good, and through them, Sony. And if you're looking at the Xbox, I think the game that springs to mind there that's come out this year is Cuphead. And I think, okay, that's an indie game. But if you look at what happened with the guys at Cuphead, Studio MDHR, those guys quit their jobs and remortgaged their homes in order to fund their artistic vision. And wow, what an artistic vision. So it is worth taking risks. That game has sold well. Look, I'm not saying that the likes of EA, Activision, Ubisoft and Warner have to risk their livelihoods. I'm not saying that they have to put themselves at actual risk of not being able to feed their families or whatever, or losing their houses. But then they don't have to, do they? Because they have the ability, they have the cash, they have the resources to take these risks. So why aren't they doing that? It seems to me that the business models have taken over from the artistic ideas. And in the long run, that will actually have a negative impact on the business as well. Because where are the new IPs coming from? If you look at what they're doing now, and you listen to Andrew Wilson, and I'm sorry to single out Andrew Wilson, he's not the only one, as I've already said. But the only time you hear the word innovation these days is in the copy that comes from the companies when they're talking about monetization. They think that is innovation. That's not innovation. It's ways of making money. I suppose you could call it innovation in the broadest sense, but from an artistic perspective, it's not at all innovation. It's just ways they're coming up with of getting more and more money out of you and me, the customers. And look, perhaps, God, I'm having to cross my fingers and my toes and just about anything else I can get hold of here. Perhaps EA will put out Anthem and it will be that game. Perhaps that is EA taking a risk with a new IP, and maybe that will turn out to be something special. But would you hold your breath? Because I'm certainly not going to. I'm expecting it to come out and it to be absolutely chock full of loot boxes and have nothing redeeming about it other than the way it looks, because it will look phenomenal. Let's be honest, it's going to look fantastic. But it'll have loot boxes and it'll have all sorts of other crap in it to try and keep us playing. It'll almost certainly be open world in some way, with lots of rinse and repeat missions to keep us engaged. Engaged doesn't really engage me when I have to keep doing the same bloody thing over and over again in a slightly different environment. But hey, you know, some people like that. And it'll keep us going and hopefully, from their point of view, keep people paying money to get new loot boxes and new stuff to keep playing, and so it goes. So, you know, I don't know that, but it wouldn't at all surprise me. And I started this video by talking about The Lord of the Rings and what they did when Tolkien came to them with that book. And it was the sequel to The Hobbit, and they looked at it and thought it was going to lose them money. And I want to end with that as well, because I think it's worth reading exactly what was said when that book came to them. There's a book and it's called, what's it called? It's called The Essential J.R.R. Tolkien Sourcebook, A Fan's Guide to Middle-earth. And this is quoted in that book on page, I think it's page 56. This is what they say in that book, and this is what happened with The Lord of the Rings. After determining the costs to publish The Lord of the Rings in 3 volumes, Rayner, that's Rayner Unwin, cabled his father that he believed it was a work of genius but would lose £1,000. His father replied that if he really felt it was a work of genius, he was free to lose the £1,000, or in other words, the book was perceived not as a potential profit maker, but a prestige book. The kind that enhances the reputation of the firm, but not the bottom line. Tolkien, who did not receive an advance for the book, agreed to a profit-sharing plan in which he would get nothing until the book made its costs back. Afterward, he and the publisher would share equally in the profits, if any. Those terms turned out to be more profitable for Tolkien than the standard royalty agreement, yeah, not surprisingly, which was usually 10% of the retail cover price. And in a DVD of The Fellowship of the Ring, Unwin is quoted as saying, "In those happy days, no second opinion was needed. If I said it was good enough to be published, it was published." Oh, God. I would love to see something like that happening in the gaming industry. And as I say, I think people like Warner, people like EA, they can afford to take the risk with one game a year, maybe one game every couple of years. I'm not saying every game has to be like this. What I'm saying is that they can put out their FIFA, they can put out their other games every year that make them their money, and they can put some of that money back into the industry. They can give us something back by producing some games that are actually high quality and aren't just exploitative. Not only do I think that would be good for us, the gamers, but I think it would be good for them, the publishers as well, and the developers. I mean, Christ, it'll be good for the developers because there's developers out there who would probably love to get their teeth into something that was a bit more interesting than the same rinse and repeat bullshit that we seem to be seeing now, where the only drive is how much money you can make. But I don't know. You know, I've got this feeling that this can't carry on, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's enough people out there who are quite happy to be exploited and quite happy to keep throwing good money after bad. And if there are, then, well, I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm not interested in those kind of games. And if we're not going to see more games like Horizon Zero Dawn and Cuphead and games like that, then I don't know. Maybe we do have to look to indies. But, you know, I have to say thank you, Sony, for keeping those kind of quality games going, because they're the ones that are really pushing that at the moment. But anyway, what do you guys think? Do you agree with me on this? I've been going on about this. I think this is a really important issue, and I would love to talk about it with you guys some more. So come in the comments, come on my Discord, let's have a chat about it. But do you think that companies like EA, Activision, Warner, and all these other big AAA companies should be putting some more money back into producing some quality products that aren't just about making money? Or do you think I'm being naive? Let me know in the comments, as I say. And as I say, I've been going on far too long, so I'm going to go and get myself a cup of tea. And I'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.